If there were a place in the world where you could store and protect the truth, it might be deep in the Rockies, in a field, on a ranch, in a silo, where an American patriot tells you what keeps him awake at night. Now, here is Medal of Honor recipient Drew Dix and words from the Silo.
Welcome, folks, to episode number 4 of the Words from the Silo. You know, we've got a good program scheduled for today. It's crime in our communities. But before we get into that, I want to welcome Henry Jones, the president of the Center for American Values.
Thanks, Drew.
Also, 44 years of law enforcement from the Denver area. So, Henry, we're proud to have you here for this very special program, and also as president of our center.
Well, thank you, Drew. I really appreciate it. And this is something that has been on my mind. Here we are in Pueblo, a great community, a great state. Recently, we had 3 Pueblo police officers that were injured, and they were ambushed. And those police officers are part of our community. And, that's something that we need to get our heads around and see if we can make our communities a lot better across the country.
You bet. And later in the program, we'll have the chief of police from Pueblo, Chris Noeller, and we're really looking forward to hearing from him and how his officers are doing. So, Brad, before we get started on that, we had a couple questions, or at least one that you told me that you got from the last program of women in combat.
Yeah,
in the military.
I do have a question, and I wrote it down here. It's kind of long, but see if you get your mind around that and give us your ideas here. So, military families deployed overseas, when they're near potential hit spots like Korea or in Europe, how will this affect fighting force if they're looking after their children?
That's a very, very a good question. It's been worked over the years in the military, and I'll go into a specific on a conversation I had with General Schwarzkopf in 1984-85 timeframe in Alaska when I was up there. But that is one of the serious problems that we have by trying to recruit military members into an occupation that's more like civilians. In other words, they're going to accompany their parents, the kids, into forward deployed theaters. And why are they there in the first place? Why are we in a forward deployed theater? We're there to meet the enemy aggression. And if that were to happen, let's face it, what are we going to do with the dependence of all of those people? So somebody's got to get. I know they're talking about it. As I mentioned, about 1984-5 time frame, not sure exactly when that was. But I was in Alaska, and I had the pleasure of taking General Schwarzkopf on a hunting trip. Him and his a longtime buddy, General Field. And we had bad weather and sitting in a tent for a couple of days, and it's a small tent. You get a lot of time for conversation. And I forget General Schwarzkopf's exact title at the time, but he was in Forces Command. And they had done an exercise, computer-generated exercise, if the Russians or Soviets had moved west towards Europe through the Fulda Gap. And what happened, and they were concerned that there were so many people, military, U.S. military, moving west, taking the children and family members out of the front lines. So it was a concern then, and I don't know what the solution is and if they've addressed it now. But we've got to think about that. So when we created the volunteer military, the idea was to make it attractive. Sure, that's what you want to do when you're recruiting people. But when you drift away from the primary mission of fighting a war or the warrior ethos, making it a family occupation, you run into a problem, because you send family members forward with their children, and first of all, if there's something happen, they're going to be looking out for their families. Not unlike in communities, if we have a major disaster, and law enforcement are going to be concerned about their families as well, if it's a major disaster. So it's a good question. I don't have an answer, but it is a serious problem, and I hope somebody has got the answer to it, because we're not sending them into Europe or Korea just to be there as an economic gesture. We're there really to fight if we have to, and that's why we got to talk about these things. And I appreciate that question from that individual.
Yeah, great. So, what's been keeping you up at night this week?
Well, a lot of things keeping me up. I'm starting to feel a little bit better about things, but we're talking about the crime in our communities. Every family member, every citizen in the United States expects to have an opportunity to be safe, seek occupation, make money for their family, support their family. But those of us have been hearing in the news more and more that there's crime out there they're preying on individuals, people. And it doesn't seem like we're really taking it serious. I mean, we're accepting it. Isn't that the impression you get, Brad? Because let me tell you, when they're walking up behind little old ladies or old men like me and hitting you in the back of the head, and that used to be unheard of years ago. And now it's kind of like, well, you shouldn't have been walking around there. That's making us the victims.
It's hard to wrap your brain around where there's no pushback, maybe citizen pushback or whatever that we were talking about earlier. But I don't know. I can't put my finger on it.
We're tolerating poor behavior, and as we always say at the end of our program, tolerance is a character flaw. Now, I am convinced that the majority of the citizens in the communities are just as offended as I am, you are, and the others. It's somehow the politicians or the government level of our communities at city and state levels have kind of got on the bandwagon to support criminals. I can't even, it's really tough to figure out how you can ever get your hand on that, head wrapped around it, because let's face it, we all want to be safe. We don't want to have to say, well, you can't go out at night. I don't see kids playing in yards anymore. I don't see them anywhere riding their bicycles down the street like we used to do in Pueblo here years ago. Mm-hmm. There was never a concern about somebody kidnapping the children or any. It just wasn't the biggest offense. We got a little mischief, but I'm not immune to that either. I did my share of mischief. And thankful for the police officers in those days. They put the fear of God in me, and right down the road there was that police station. And I remember one time my buddy and I were doing something. It wouldn't even register as a problem right now, so I don't even need to mention what it was. Yeah. But they hauled us away, and they didn't knock on the door and say, "Where do you live?" and they took us there and lined us up on the wall there, and for 5 or 6 hours, not to say a word, and watching all the drunks and stuff coming in and putting them in the clink there. And then after 4 or 5 hours, we knew we were going to jail. They came up and said, "Okay, boys, you go home, and I don't want to see you down here again." Well, I never went down there again.
Yeah.
But that's what it was like in those days. And it's hard for people, even young people now, to even understand how that was.
Right.
So we've got to get our handles on this. And I think when we get the chief here, he's got a real handle on this community, and probably talking to other police chiefs association or whatever, he's got a handle on how they're doing it there. But Henry, what do you think about that?
Well, what's interesting is I started in law enforcement in 1978. That's back in the dinosaur age for you, Brad. But what was interesting is, I can remember in the academy what they would tell us, and it was a different time. So I remember in the academy, and it stuck with me for all these years. But they used to tell us that police badge that you have, that you wear, doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the citizens that you serve. And the only time that you get that badge and you get to keep that badge is when you retire. So, it made a profound impact on me. And back in the day, and I'm pretty sure that the chief can tell a little bit more about that, but law enforcement was different. Drew, you were talking about it earlier about kids outside playing, kids were more involved. You had, irregardless of what type of family you grew up, it could be a single parent. That parent was involved with that kid. You had an aunt, you had an uncle, you had a brother, you had some hero or somebody to look up to that would fill that void, that would keep that kid out of trouble. And then it started to shift, and then the political climate started to shift with law enforcement. With the recent George Floyd, the defunding the police. Bail laws were changed, rules of engagement were changed, qualified immunity was changed, and it had an effect on law enforcement. So a lot of law enforcement officers, and I'm just talking about a street officer, we started pulling back.
I know, Henry, and that's unfortunate. I have a special place in my heart for law enforcement. I guess it's because we have the same warrior ethos as law enforcement, or the same desire to help people. They run to the fire, they run to the action to see if they can help people, and we deserve to support them better. And I hope that shows like this and the Center for American Values, who's recognizing law enforcement more about the sacrifices they make, it catches on across the country, and that we start to make a difference. But we've got to do better. The one thing is they're also letting us down is the law enforcement, even if they are doing the job and arresting people and taking them to court, they're out of jail in no time, or there's no bond, or it's kind of like it's upside down. The criminals are the victims, and it shouldn't be that way. A criminal is a criminal, and they've got them all around the world in every community. But somehow we're bringing more and more here for whatever reason. That's a whole nother program, the criminal element of illegals coming in. And I'm not so sensitive to calling them illegals, because they are. But what I'm seeing now is more and more of those immigrants that are coming in are starting to realize, wait a minute, we can't tolerate this. So Henry, I want to thank you for being here.
No, thanks. Yeah, appreciate you having me here. Just food for thought. Just let everybody know that, we as law enforcement officers are part of the community. We're your brothers, your sisters, your aunt, uncles, fathers, grandfathers, but we're part of that community, and we can't do our job without the community being involved and backing us up.
Well, I hear you, Henry.
Yep.
And thank you very much.
Thank you, Drew.
All right, we're back here discussing crime in the communities, and we're really pleased to have a Pueblo police chief here. Chief, glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm honored to be part of this. I appreciate it, Drew.
You know, we're with you on this. We were talking a little bit earlier about that the law enforcement are very similar to the military, and that it's something in their core that makes them want to be to serve the community in that capacity. And over the years, a lot of people that were in the military, when they get out, they pursue police work.
Yeah,
is that still happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. To quite a pretty big extent. I think I would say at least half of our officers have served in some capacity in the military, whether it's the Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines,
Good.
Coast Guard.
Yeah, I think that's we talk about the warrior ethos, and that doesn't necessarily just pertain to active duty military or military personnel. While a police officer may not be a warrior in per se, they have the same desire to help the communities, help the people. But I've been staying up a little bit at night thinking about why are we tolerating this poor behavior in our communities? You know, they put a cap or a limit on how much you could steal, and before it's prosecuted. In my opinion, in my day, if you stole a candy bar, you committed a crime.
Yeah, and you probably went to jail.
And could have went to jail, yeah.
That's a great point. One thing that's happened over the last 10 years in law enforcement is this move to try to get away from officers referring to themselves as warriors. And I really have a hard time with that. What we do every day my officers come to work, they put a gun on their hip, they put a bulletproof vest on, they get into a patrol car that has a shotgun and an AR-15 in it. They have computers. They're responding to calls where, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, 3 of my officers were shot. And it takes a certain mindset to do that. And the people that you want doing that are the people that have that warrior ethos. You know, you look at some of the events that have happened around our country where cops have set back waiting for people to help respond, second responding units. There was a school shooting in Florida where an officer waits outside the building while the guy's inside there shooting. That's not a warrior mindset. And what our communities have to have is people that are willing to put other people before themselves. A guardian sits on a wall waiting for the enemy to come to them. A warrior goes out and hunts the enemy and either neutralizes them, takes them into custody, or whatever. And I think part of the issue we've seen in our profession and why it's so hard to recruit is because of this forced switch away from that mentality of being a warrior.
You know, I agree with you 100%, Chief. And the warrior mentality is not a warrior against the citizens.
Correct.
It's a warrior camaraderie between each other as well, right. To know that you will have their back and they will have your back. And that's the biggest part of a warrior ethos is working together on the same mission. So I hope recruiting is picking up. I hope there's some interest in it. I'm not sure why there isn't, that like it used to be. I mean, there was a waiting list to get through the training academies in my day.
Yeah, when I applied to the Pueblo Police Department in 1994, there was, I want to say, anywhere from 600 to 700 people applied, and there was only 4 positions. We just had a closing for positions here. It closed the 30th of March, and we had 60 people apply, and I have 50 openings.
60 people apply for 50 openings.
Yeah, and it's kind of the issue is, so you have 60 applicants. By the time you get down to a group that you can actually hire because they've passed the written test, the physical test, the polygraph, the psychological, and all that stuff, out of that group of 60, you might get 3 people.
Yeah, it's like in recruiting in special forces in my day, it was out of 100, you'd get 3 is what the number was.
Right. We're not quite as cool, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you start to narrow down, but the problem is we're going to have to lower our standards because they've encouraged crime so much that there are more people that have experimented with crime, I guess.
Well,
And it's on
I'm
the
proud to
record.
say that we really haven't lowered our standards at the Pueblo Police Department.
Good.
You know, because there's a lot of unintended consequences that can come from that. You end up hiring people that are doing things they shouldn't be as police officers, whether that's illegal or immoral or unethical behavior, and that sort of thing. Because internally we have this discussion often, and a couple of my people will say we've lowered our standards, and we haven't. So if this is your standard right here at this level, and you have 800 applicants, the people you're hiring are up here. You know what I mean? It's like the 100, you get 3 Green Berets out of 100 applicants. You're getting the cream of the crop. There's probably nobody out there that's better than those 3 people. So you're hiring, your standard for a Green Beret, maybe you have to do, I'm just going to make something up, 5 pull-ups. These guys are doing 55 pull-ups.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
And you've got 100, 97 other people that are doing at least the 5, but they're somewhere here. Now, what we're looking at now, and it's not, I don't want my officers to think I think that they're not, the ones we have aren't good, but you're having fewer that are up at that high of a level, and you're hiring people that are closer to where that standard is out of that group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that, Chief, because I think a lot of communities have overreacted and started to get the numbers up, and they've lowered their standards,
Yes.
and then what do you do with them
Right.
after you have them and they don't meet your standards? And
it's not easy to get rid of employees this day and age.
And how's the morale with when you have your new recruits and things like that? Especially after the incident you had.
That's a great question. Initially I was really concerned about where we would be as an organization after this incident, because it weighed on all of us. I've been a cop for 31 years, and it hit me really hard to have 3 of my guys get injured, and in the way that they did, and I was really concerned. And we had some officers that had a difficult time with it, and the jury's still out on what it'll look like months down the road. But for right now, I'm really proud to say that our department has pulled together. We're looking after each other. We're taking care of one another. We've done a good job, I believe, as an organization, bringing in people that can help with the mental trauma that happens in an incident like this, not just for the guys that were injured and not just for the guys that were involved in the actual shooting, but for the officers that were on scene, the officers that were, know the people. There's a lot of people that, it affects mentally. So,
an ambush like that is a tough thing to fight, because the one that's laying an ambush has got a plan. So I'm sure you've worked on some training about how to identify potential ambushes, because I'll tell you, after 9/11, when I was up in Alaska as a Homeland Security guy, the one thing that I was concerned with was the setting up an ambush, calling for, let's say, a fire or a vehicle ambush or a phone call, and then somebody laying in wait. It is tough to deal if you don't have a plan and the enemy does. They're going to operate the way they've planned, and we've got to be able to respond accordingly. Now, how are those officers doing?
I'm really happy to say 2 of them have returned home. If you would have heard the list of injuries, those 2 officers received head injuries from AR-15 223 round. And they're the first 2 to go home. It's amazing, and I attribute it solely to God intervening. Our 3rd officer is still in the hospital. He will probably be there at least till the middle of the month. He's got some pretty significant trauma to his femur and his upper arm. They had to put a metal plate and a rod in his femur, and so he's got a lot of rehab to do. I think 2 of the 3 have a bit of a road for recovery. One of them, he's talking about coming back to work in about a week. So we'll see whether that comes to fruition.
He's a warrior, right?
Yes, sir. He is. He's a bit of a, I don't know if I can say it, but a bit of a badass.
Well, that's we got to have them, and so please pass on our best and thanks for their service to the community.
And to be clear, all 3 of them are badasses.
All right, good deal. So, Brad, any other questions that we've picked up through the inquiries through the center?
Well, I was just looking at some of the notes I had here, and we talked about the recruiting in law enforcement and how those have changed. But just I just, when I asked about the morale, I was just interested in if you have people running to join or trying to leave when you have a critical incident like you had.
I think in the past we've had these kind of instances, and it's really fairly immediately we have people leaving. Not in large numbers, but there's been a couple. Unfortunately, our department is no stranger to officer-involved shootings. I think we've had 51 over the last 14 years, and that's a lot for a department our size. And we've had a few of those instances where within weeks of the incident, there's people that have decided that this is no longer what they want to do. So far, we have a couple people that are leaving. Those departures were planned prior to this incident. What I was hoping is that we would have a lot more people step up and want to help us address this issue, but that hasn't come to fruition yet, unfortunately. But
what in the title of this program tonight is crime in the community. What are your biggest threats? What are you guys facing?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different threats, and threat, as Drew knows, is it kind of depends on where you're standing at the time. What's a threat? But I think our biggest threat to our community right now is the violent crime that we're having. I think what's interesting is that probably isn't the perspective of the citizens in our community. I think what's interesting is we had about 102 murders over the last 3-4 years. And I not one time got a phone call of somebody complaining about a murder. But I get phone calls multiple times a day about people complaining about, people loitering outside the loaf and jug, people using drugs over at the fountain, the homeless situation, that kind of thing. So what I find difficult, and it's not unique to my position, and it's just part of being a leader, is trying to manage all of those different expectations. Because when I look at what I ought to be focusing on, as the biggest number one priority is trying to stop the gun violence in our community. But you have to weigh that against what also the community expects and wants. And our citizens have a right to enjoy the amenities in our community without worrying about being accosted, without being worried about their kids seeing somebody using drugs 100 feet away from them. So it's balancing those threats that becomes difficult. And with our manpower situation, it kind of exacerbates that. And then, as I'm sure we'll get into, some of the legislation that's come down and the changes in laws and what we can enforce, how we can enforce it, and the consequences for violating the law are certainly problematic in us being able to address things the way we would like to.
Of the crimes you see, do you, of the gun violence and things like that, are they domestic or are they more maybe organized crime related, gang related?
And I think that's a great question, and I think it answers why we don't hear too many complaints about the gun crime in our community, because it is fairly targeted. There is a little bit of it that is domestic violence related, whether that's gun or just violent crime, assaults and stuff like that. The majority of it is either drug or gang related. So really, if you're not into that world, you're probably not likely to be touched by it as much. But it is still a factor. But I think that's what I tell myself when I think about why am I getting all these complaints about, homeless people when we had 28 murders last year, and that was the year before. But it does explain why that happens.
Chief, I've been thinking while you were talking about we have violence, and in a lot of the communities, most of the communities, I don't know any is violent free, but
right.
In assessment, not any specifics, but the numbers of the people that have committed violence, how many would you say are unemployed? They're either homeless or I'm not saying homeless people commit, but there's no connection to the community. Right. They're either a gang member or just not employed. They're here, and their source of income we don't know about.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that particular question. I think a way I would respond is to say that I think, generally speaking, the people that we're dealing with that are committing the violent crimes are repeat offenders. They are also people that maybe don't have jobs, maybe not unemployed, but their criminal activity is where they gain their income through. Some are employed and still use criminal activity to gain additional, additional resources, money, whatever. But I think the issue from my perspective is about the continued repeat behaviors. The other thing that we're starting to see, unfortunately, is a lot more juvenile crime that's related to gun violence. And by juveniles, I'm talking young kids. I think we had a 12-year-old about 3 years ago that shot somebody at a carnival.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and what's happening there, I think, is the older gang members are using these younger gang members to commit the criminal activity.
Absolutely.
Because there's fewer consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. They're young people are very impressionable, and they're looking for identity.
Right.
And unfortunately, we've lost the ability on a large scale to provide identity to young people growing up in school. And so they're going to say, I'm going to show them, I'm going to do this. And somebody gives them that chance to peddle drugs or whatever, give them a Glock or something and put it in their back pocket or whatever. It's totally different from when I was a kid. And I said I'd never tell people how it was because they just wouldn't believe it. When I lived on the north side over here, I'd get on my bicycle, either have my 22 or my shotgun, pedal down the road and go hunt quail over by where the Lowe's is. I mean, I was 12 years old, 13 years old. And if someone ever stopped me, my neighbor, they're just talking to me, I was very careful that, because my dad said, don't point that accidentally.
Right.
No one ever thought about pointing it to shoot them, but accidentally, or we'll take that gun away from you. And well, when they'd walk up to me, I was always making sure the barrel was pointed away. But no, it's just different times.
It is.
And I had good times as a kid in Pueblo, and I Brad too.
Yeah,
I'm sure. And I feel sorry for the kids now that don't have an opportunity to ride their bicycles all the way to Westcliff or to ride. We did that.
Wow.
Or out to where the reservoirs are out there by Pueblo West and shoot rabbits or something and whatever, just as young kids. And that's just not possible now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a lot younger than you.
But, well, we're not talking about how you just look. But.
No, but I mean, I experience similar things. And when I drive around the neighborhood, it's funny because I have a neighbor now that has a couple kids and they run around and I'm thinking, what are they doing? Why are they out? Because you don't see it. Right. You don't see it like we used to see it. And I, little guy Trevor, and he's like telling me to go across the street and he's directing traffic. And I kind of like it because he's like the old school kid. And he's like 5, but yet when he's running up and down the cul-de-sac, even at the corner, I start thinking, wait, where's he going? But we used to go miles, like you're saying.
Yeah, I did.
Out
Out to the
car
back
when
of
the car
Lake
was
Mesa.
coming.
Yeah,
Hike out
absolutely.
there.
No doubt.
Which
so
was
it
a
has
long way in those days.
It has changed. One thing I will say, I was a military brat. We kind of lived all over, and for a while I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. And, even in Las Vegas, we were out, and I'm going to tell you right now, the crime in Vegas is worse than what we got here, even today. And we were still outside playing in our yards. I think some of that is crime still existed back then. We still had, gangs were a thing in Vegas. Gun violence was a thing in the 80s and when I lived in Vegas, and we still played outside. I think some of that is caused by the amount of news that we get, and people hear it more often than we used to. And I think a lot of it is just the way kids are nowadays with technology. They don't want to play outside as much. Now, I'm not saying that there's no reason to worry here in Pueblo or to be paying attention. I guess it would be a better way of saying it, to your surroundings. But I live in the city of Pueblo. I raise kids in the city of Pueblo, and we still go do things. It is still a great community, and I'm fortunate as a non-native to live here, I think.
Well, Chief, the name of this program is Crime in Our Communities, and And the law enforcement can't solve all this problem. The communities need to get behind the law enforcement. Get on the phone, call the chief, call the whoever answers the phone over there and say, this is what I heard, or I need to talk to somebody. Right. And I know they'll follow up on it. It can't be just responding to violence that's already happened. We need to get in front of some of this stuff. And if we don't, then we're going to be just picking up the pieces from now on. Right. But I want to urge all of our listeners to get involved in their communities. If there's not a good relationship between the community and law enforcement, do what you can to make that better. I don't think there's a law enforcement agency in this country that wouldn't appreciate community support.
Well, absolutely.
You brought up tech and the 24-hour news cycle and all the quickness of the technology. How is that handcuffed response on your police that they're maybe afraid to engage because of the cameras on them at all times and some of those things, and then it puts them in harm's way because they're hesitant maybe because the cameras are rolling at all times?
Right. That's a great question, and it's something that I think communities and chiefs of police and clearly the officers who are out there where the rubber meets the road struggle with. But I think in our department, we do a really good job of trying to support the officers. I think part of the reality is, as a leader in a law enforcement organization, you have to build a culture where the officers believe that, absent some really egregious behavior, you're going to have their back. And I think we have that. I'm not going to go so far as to say none of my officers have those fears and maybe aren't as proactive or as reactive as they should be because of those fears. But I think generally, as a department here in Pueblo, we do a fairly good job of just doing our job. And another way that as a leader, I can try to make that be the case is by providing effective training so that they understand the right and left limits of what they can and can't do. We train them, give them good tools. We use it's Gracie Survival Tactics is one of our defensive tactics programs, and it's basically a jiu-jitsu based program that gives them the skills where they aren't, because I'm just going to be perfectly honest with you. Use of force is ugly. I can't make it look nice. Mm-hmm. If you don't do what a cop asks you to do, at some point we have to make you do it, and there's no way to do that and make it look nice. There are techniques through GST, it's called, that we can. It's not as violent looking, and it allows our officers to maintain control, be safe, get their job done. But I think, part of the reality is, as a leader, part of my biggest focus is to make sure that my people know that I'm going to have their back. If they're operating where we should be, that I'm going to support them regardless of what the outside pressures are, and ensure them that you go, we go, kind of a mentality.
That's a very good point. It never entered my mind not to do what a police officer asked me to do when I was a kid.
Or my dad.
Never entered my mind.
Right.
And it seems that it's so simple. And I've heard people say this as a politician, just do what they say. Mm-hmm. You're going to be all right. And if they're doing something wrong,
sue us.
You got plenty of opportunities to correct it. I know you would want to correct any poor behavior or poor judgment and look at it as a training thing. But what's happened now is I think the people are too sue happy, and they got some lawyer over there that's going to take this case and make citizens feel like they're above everything.
Well, and I think one of the big mantras right now is de-escalation, and as cops, we should, where we can, try to de-escalate and not escalate a situation. It's incumbent on us. It's incumbent for our own well-being to try to get as much accomplished without using force as possible. But de-escalation nowadays, the way they talk about it in the public sphere, and by that I mean the media, certain legislators, certain lawyers, is somehow de-escalation is a one-way street, and it's all our responsibility to do it. I can ask you pretty please 100 times, and if you aren't going to do it, you're not going to do it. how much time do we spend doing that? How much time do we, how much accountability do we place on the suspect to actually do what you're told? It's a lawful command. There are very few instances that you can have that would be on display throughout our country over the last 15 years where an officer has given somebody an unlawful order. It just doesn't happen that often. Does it ever happen? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it that often? No. And if it does happen, there's remedies. You can file an internal affairs complaint.
Mm-hmm.
You can sue us in civil court. And you can do a bunch of other things. Call the mayor, call your council people, whatever, to address those issues.
Well, people take it personal.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't make me do that. You've seen these mainly low-level politicians being stopped by the police, and they act like complete idiots out there. If they're drinking or whatever, and they're trying to look intelligent, and they call the chief. I saw one recently. Call the chief, and they didn't do it. Well, why would they?
No.
The
Well, at some point they need to let me know, but not till after they do
Yeah,
their
but you
job.
don't need any more work than what you got. But you don't need to deal with idiots and those that are drunk. I mean, I remember the first time, I was a kid, high school, when cameras were being used during an arrest, and at that time they had them on a dash of the
car.
The police, state police mainly, or the Colorado State Patrol. And I remember one time when they were using it, and one of my buddies that was had a lot of extracurricular activities, drinking a little bit, and so they had a camera of him doing a sobriety test or whatever. So I saw it too, and
It's interesting.
He said, "I'm guilty. Please don't show that to anybody." But no, that was a long time ago. But no, we've got to do better as community, and the whole program here is. I don't think what we've talked about tonight today is going to help me sleep tonight. I just know that. It's going to get better if the people make it better. If we get involved as a society and help the police, it's going to make it better for everybody. And I'll tell you right now, there's poor behavior in this country. I don't fly anymore, not because I'm afraid of the airplane going to crash. I see rude behavior on an airplane, and I don't think I can sit down and watch it. So I just don't do it anymore.
I think part of the issue in that regard is just the ability for somebody to say something on social media that I don't like, and I can say all kinds of stuff back to them, and there's nothing they can do. I'm not necessarily as old as you are, but I'm 55 years old. And when
You're a child.
Yeah. When I grew up, though, if you had something to say to somebody, you had to get up and say it to them. Mm-hmm. And there's a really good chance you're going to get punched in the throat if you do it. Mm-hmm. And it kept people were really a lot more civil back then, because there was a really good chance back in that day, because when I went to high school, if you got in a fight in school, you didn't get expelled. You got in trouble, and your dad, you went home, and I guarantee you, Mr. Noeller was not going to tolerate.
Well, you went to the edge of the campus.
Yeah. Yeah, you did it off school grounds,
Yeah,
but
you
but
went to
Mr. Noeller was not going to tolerate that. I can tell you that right now.
No, especially if you didn't win.
No.
But,
Yeah.
no, it was a little different. But anyway, we're not going to go back the way it was.
No.
But I think the problem, it affects older people like me and you two young gentlemen, because we remember how it used to be.
Right. Yeah.
And it is so frustrating to watch my grandkids and great grandson now to be raised in a different environment where they can't be a kid. They have to be supervised every minute of the day, and that's unfortunate. But I think we're pretty much running out of time, and I really appreciate your time, Chief. Any last words?
Yes, thank you. I was honored to be here with you guys and be a part of this program. One thing I would like to just ask the citizens, whether you're here in Colorado, here in Pueblo, or somewhere else in America, is to pay attention to what your state legislators are doing, what laws they're passing, and how that changes accountability across the board. I was Monday night, I was up in Denver testifying on a bill and found out while I was up there that there's a bill, Senate Bill 25-155, where they are trying to push forward a plan where it would include 2 state senators, 2 state representatives, and 40 people that are incarcerated in prison to form a panel to try to discuss how they feel they should be treated while they're in jail and to forward recommendations for policy to the legislators. I mean, what I'm going to tell you is that makes zero sense to me whatsoever. There's 2 different things that are going on here potentially. One is we're unionizing the people that are in DOC, Department of Corrections, and allowing them a voice that they shouldn't have. And number 2, we are now going to give them a voice in what laws are passed in our state. I don't see a panel with victims on it. Any panel that includes police officers is outweighed 6-1. People that are anti-police to police officers. The CC, they had a commission or committee a couple years back that is no longer in existence, but there was 40 people on that commission. 2 were police officers.
Chief, that's what we already said, is they're making victims out of the damn criminals.
Yes, sir.
And until we get a handle on that, we're not going to solve this problem. And I echo what you're saying. You should get involved. The mindset of a certain political entity is to keep making things warm and fuzzy and making people, maybe they won't be criminals anymore. That's a bunch of crap. Right. Bad people are bad people.
Yes, sir, and you can't change that.
No, and just brings up a new question, but I'm going to not sleep too good tonight because that program you just talked about, that House bill, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. 40 criminals out there that
and the
want
kicker
to be treated better.
The kicker is they have to actually be incarcerated. So even if a guy got out on parole, he can no longer be on that committee.
Why don't we send them to El Salvador? Yeah. That's my opinion. All right.
I did like the way I saw they run the prison.
What's the bill number again?
It's Senate Bill 25-155.
Thank you.
And for all you listeners and watchers and folks out there that are enjoying this program, Words from the Silo, let us know what you think of the program. Hit that subscribe button. And what that'll do is allow you to get a notification of when our programs come out. And they do come out every Wednesday morning. So the next one will be out next Wednesday.
Yes, sir.
And so we're looking forward to hearing from all of you. So thank you. And remember, tolerance is a character flaw.
Just because no one knows doesn't mean it isn't true.